Welcome back to our intermediate financial accounting class. In our last segment, we started talking about the ASC and FASB and the process of setting GAAP. We showed examples of FASB's technical agenda and the information provided there. We showed you what's in an accounting standards update and also showed you how to log in and access the ASC. And again, you can use the basic free version, which will work just fine for what we're doing, or you can log in using your university's login or your professional login if you have one. Now that we've gotten into the system, let's take a look at what FASB provides to all of us as part of the ASC. So the first thing you'll notice, and hopefully played around with a little bit before logging into this video, are the categories. Before we jump into this, you have to understand something about FASB's logic in creating the ASC. They have a search feature. You can see it right up here. But it's not Google by any stretch of the imagination. It's a decent search feature, and we'll use it later. But it is not the best way to search the ASC, which is one of our key concepts. The best way to search the ASC is to use FASB's logic in creating the standards. Because once you get a feel for FASB's logic, it's very easy to narrow down and find a specific rule or example. Search feature can work very well too, but it's usually not quite as efficient once you get the hang of it. So again, the best way to search the ASC is to use FASB's logic. So what is FASB's logic? Well, FASB broke down all of GAAP based on the main component of a transaction. That's how they decided where to put things. So let's take a simple example of purchasing PP&E. If you were to buy a new piece of equipment, the main part of the transaction is getting the new equipment. It's not the way I financed it because the financing involved can change. I could use cash, I could issue debt, I could issue stock and use the proceeds to buy the asset. I've got lots of options on the financing side. But regardless of how I finance it, I'm buying PP&E. So PP&E and the creation of this asset, that's a constant in this decision to buy this piece of equipment. So I would start with the asset because that's the main piece. And now that we've decided on our category, the next thing we'll see is a list of topics. So within each category, we've further broken it down into the different topics. And you can see down at the bottom, property, plant, and equipment have their own topic. We've also got cash equivalents, investments, inventory, etc. Now, before we jump into the PP&E topic, I do want to mention one other piece. You'll notice here, this says 32X. And anytime you see an X, it means that FASB decided that there were so many topics, it would be confusing to list them all at once. So if you click on that, you can see under investments, I have 5 other topics. And that X right here signifies that there are more. But notice it would have made it really hard to read this first list if I'd had 5 different versions of investments as part of that initial list. So again, in order to make it easy for you to follow the flow from category into topic and on, FASB has given a main heading and lets you dig into it if you want to. Now, if I decide I don't want to look at investments because I want to look at PP&E, then I just won't click on any of these. I'll go back and click on property, plant, and equipment. Once you've chosen the topic that you want to be in, now FASB will bring up what they call the subtopics. And the subtopics break it down even further to make it easier to find the rules that you're looking for. So you can see we have an overall set of rules that apply to all companies. And then FASB's got a separate subtopic for real estate because there are special rules and special considerations when dealing with real estate. In addition, what you'll notice down here are what we call shared subtopics, the 900s. And the 900s are industry-specific rules where FASB has got special accommodations for the industry. Fair warning at this point, it is very rare that you need a 900 rule unless you happen to be working in that particular industry. So make sure you only go into the 900s. It's a full separate category. You can see it over here under industry. Matter of fact, I'm going to switch off of it. You can see FASB has broken down a lot of information for various industries. That's okay if you're in that industry. But please make a mental note to yourself. Do not use a 900 rule unless you're sure you need to be focused in that particular industry because their rules won't apply outside of the industry. So be careful of that. So I'm looking for general rules about property, plant, and equipment. I'm going to go back. I don't want real estate. I don't want a 900 industry specific. I want an overall set of rules. And when I click on that, it's going to bring me to a list of sections. And each section has a specific type of rule that it contains. So the status section tells you where FASB is at on any projects to update the rules. 05 are overview and background. It summarizes what's going on. 15 talks about who it will apply to. We call it scope and scope exceptions. So basically, this is going to list what industries will use these rules, what types of transactions will use these rules, and what exceptions there are to these rules. 20 lets you link to the glossary. The glossary is a big dictionary that defines terms FASB's way, which is very different from what you'll see in the normal dictionary, tax code, audit rules, or general business definitions. So we want to make sure when we're doing GAAP or doing accounting that we're using FASB's definitions for things. The next section is going to be what we call recognition. And so section 25 deals with how we initially recognize whatever that topic is. So this will deal with when do we recognize it and how do we recognize it, journal entry wise, but it will not deal with how much we recognize. How much we recognize is in section 30. This is the actual debit and credit amount, whereas in recognition it tells us when and what the debit and credit will be. So to break this down, recognition would deal with when do I get to show that this asset is mine, and would I debit equipment or intangibles or a general PP&E account, etc., and what will my credit be? Do I credit in another asset? Do I credit financing? It will explain what those rules are and how you choose your credit based on how you did your financing. Then in initial measurement, FASB will tell you how to decide how much you debit into that PP&E account or our equipment account. And we'll explain it's everything that you spent getting this asset ready to go for your business. That's explained in initial measurement. Next, we have to deal with subsequent measurement. So this is all the changes that happen to the account after you got it onto your books. So with the purchase of equipment, we're dealing with depreciation. The depreciation methods are described in section 35. 40 walks through derecognition, meaning how do we get it off of our books. So it's in this section that we will read the rules for how we record a sale of an asset, the disposal of an asset, meaning we just junk it, or an exchange of the asset, swapping it for a newer model or swapping it with another company. Other presentation matters talks about how we put them onto the financial statements and how they get included into balance sheet versus income statement and cash flows. Moving down, we then go into disclosures. This is what you have to report in the footnotes to your financial statements. And then perhaps the most important of all is section 55. Please highlight this one. It's the most useful of all, I think, because in 55, FASB shows its examples of how to implement the rule. Interesting thing about FASB, they will not provide examples of easy pieces. They will only provide examples of what they feel are challenging things, things that people might be confused about. So if they think the rule is easy, you'll just see the rule. Debit equipment, credit cash, done. No example. But in the implementation guidance, we might see rules on how to do a swap or an exchange because there's a lot involved in exchanging one asset for another. And land would have no depreciation, but if I am swapping equipment, how do I handle the depreciation? How do I handle the accumulated depreciation? Do I record some depreciation expense before the swap? What is there a gain or loss? All of that stuff is illustrated in section 55. So often when you're trying to find a rule, you can go to 55 first, find an example of what you're trying to do, then it will link you back to earlier sections where you can actually find the rules. From there, relationships is not one that we use very much. We won't talk about it. XBRL is a way to code your financial reports so that analysts and investors can pull up your information the way that they want to. If they don't want to look at your 10K but want to pull a bunch of data from a bunch of companies and compare them, they use XBRL data tags to do that. So FASB explains the way that you tag that information. Finally, you'll see these S's. We aren't going to take a lot of time on them, but the S stands for SEC. These are the SEC exceptions, rules, etc. that are required just for publicly traded companies. So technically, from 0 to 75 is GAAP. From S00 on down is rules for publicly traded companies only. Now you look at this and you think, Jason, how could this possibly be the easy way? This doesn't make any sense. There's all this different information and I don't know. How would I do this? Let me share with you an example. Let's say that we work for a company that has just been given notice by the local state government that we need to clean up the area around our office building because it's kind of a mess and they want us to take better care of the environment around us. We didn't know that we were going to need to do that. We thought we were doing a pretty good job, but apparently we're not quite up to standards. Our problem is we've got 2 years to get it cleaned up and meet the requirement from the state. How much should I recognize? Okay, well, let's stop and think about this for just a second. So let's start with our stop and think model. So S stands for summarize. What is going on in the situation? The situation is we have been given an assignment by the government to clean up our land or we will get hit with fees. T is to think. What is it that I need to provide? I need to provide a number. That's what my company wants from me. How much do I have to record? Other people apparently are looking up the debit and the credit and disclosures and whatever. My job is to figure out how much. So that's what I need to figure out. What steps would I need to use to figure out my task? And this is where we're going to walk through FASB's logic. So I know that I'm reporting a liability to clean up the area around me. I know it's a liability because I know I'm going to have to pay to do this. So I know I'm going to start in liabilities. Next, I'm specifically looking for asset retirement obligations or cleanup obligations. And I can see right here, there's a whole section on asset retirement and environmental obligations. This topic is where I want to be because that's what I'm trying to figure out. Next, I'm looking to figure out how much I need to record. That's that initial measurement piece. That's section 30. So I need to find a section 30. So let me click on overall here and see if I've got some overall guidance. Notice the overall guidance is simply glossary terms and some background and status. That's all it is. That's not what I'm looking for. Now I've got two options. I either have an asset retirement obligation, which is an obligation to retire the asset, meaning as part of getting rid of the asset or disposing of the asset, I have to do some cleanup or some corrections. Or I can do an environmental obligation. Well, since I'm not getting rid of my office building, I'm just trying to meet a requirement from the government with a building I'm currently using. This is not anything to do with retirement. It has to do with an environmental obligation. So I want to be in the environmental obligations section. And from there, I'm looking for initial measurement. Now we're into the actual body of the standard. And what we have are specific paragraphs. And I need to take a second and highlight this as another of our key concepts. We cite gap like this. ASC, and we make sure we put ASC because it's the Accounting Standards Codification. So we start with ASC and then we put the topic, 410, the subtopic, 30, the section, 30, and the paragraph, 1. We have to provide enough detail that if our auditors want to see this rule or a regulator wants to see the rule, I can show them the exact paragraph I used to do my accounting. So we're going to follow it all the way down and include all the way down to the paragraph. Start with the reference to the ASC, every single piece down to the paragraph. If you don't do that, it's not a correct citation. And that's a key concept. The exact way to cite gap is one of our key concepts. And I'll tell you why. I had a friend of mine that he and I argue all the time. He's in practice, I'm in academia. We like to fight about things. And I asked him specifically, how do you cite the ASC? What bibliography do you want? What bibliographic information do you want to see? And we'd been chatting on the phone and it just went dead. I thought we dropped the call. But he came back and he said, that's the trouble with you guys in academia and those of us in practice. As long as I can find it, I don't care what format they use. So that's my new rule with citations. As long as I can find it. And the only way to find a citation in the ASC is to know I'm in the ASC and have every piece of information down to the exact paragraph, because then I can immediately find it. So make sure you include all 4 pieces: topic, subtopic, section, paragraph. So this is what we're looking at with this rule. How much do I record? And as you read through this, you'll notice the ASC is written in very legalistic terms, and they take a while to figure out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the headings. And so this is allocating the liability among responsible parties. I'm the only responsible party at this point, as far as I know. It's just me. It's not like there's 3 different companies that are all using this public spot. This is my office building, so it's my responsibility. So I don't need to worry about that. Instead, I'm going to come down here and focus on the cost to be included. This is how I would decide it. So once an entity has determined that it is probable that a liability has been incurred, I have a letter from the government, it's probable, the entity shall estimate the liability based on available information. And it tells us more in these paragraphs about what available information is in there. We're going to include specifically the share of the liability to our site as opposed to other people's site. That'd be 100%. And anything that's not being paid by the government or an insurance company, etc. So at this point, I would have to include everything because I'm the company that's involved. Then we go on. Then we're going to measure my liability. And it tells me some things to keep in mind. But right down here, costs to be included in the measurement are the following. Direct costs of the remediation effort, meaning the specific cost that I will have to spend doing the cleanup, and the cost of compensation and benefits for those employees who will spend a significant amount of time on the effort. And then it goes on, and there's other rules and considerations. But if I were to go back to my company and say, this is what we need to do, I would use this paragraph. I wouldn't have to cite everything else. The fact that we're the only company involved and we can subtract out what our insurance company is going to pay, those are good to know too. But this is the key piece, what we're going to have to pay in direct costs. So the new trees we're going to have to plant, and paying a hazmat company if necessary to come in and clean up some of the stuff that's not appropriate. If we have to pay experts to come in and help with the wildlife and making sure that they're okay, we'd add all of those costs up. And then if I'm the person assigned to it and it's my job to make sure it happens, then we would include my salary for the time that I will spend helping with that obligation, as well as any other employees that might help pick up trash or help do some of the other cleanup. If we're going to pay them, that gets included as well. We could talk more about environmental liabilities and all that stuff, but the key idea here is, did you see how by using our stop and think method and just going step by step by step, we could get right to the exact paragraph with relatively little stress? That's cool. And that's the best way to search the ASC. What category do I want to be in? My summary, what's going on overall? What is it I need to provide? Well, that will help me narrow it down to topic, subtopic, and section. And from there, I can go through and read through the headings, find the appropriate section to read, and then find my rule. That's how you search the ASC. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the search function and how to use it, and we'll go from there. We'll see you next time. Thanks.